Good afternoon, everyone. So technological disruption is an opportunity for change, especially for India. Emerging technologies and digitization are reshaping business models, production processes, and global value chains. Not only that, but they are changing workplaces, how we work, and the kind of work that we do. If managed effectively, these changes can be leveraged to create sufficient new employment opportunities for India's growing labor force. They can also help to create more effective social security and protection measures for India's workers. At the same time, they can help to bring more women and other marginalized communities into the paid economy. The Observer Research Foundation and the World Economic Forum, as we have just heard, have collaborated on research over the last year. A part of that has been conducting two quite extensive surveys. One was an enterprise survey of around 800 companies, where we asked them what kind of technologies they're adopting and the impacts they have seen on their workforce due to this. The other was an survey of youth aspirations, where we asked 6,000 youth about their aspirations, ambitions, and hopes for the future with regard to employment and employability. And findings from these surveys have sort of shed a new light on what the future of work in India might look like. So today I'll share with you three kind of key opportunities. So the first is this. India is a country that is open to technology. Companies are optimistic about the future, and they're open to adopting new technologies and the possibilities that they present. In fact, most of the companies that we spoke to see technology adoption as the key to improving their business in the next 5 years. We also found some evidence to provide some insights to the big question, which is automation and technology going to displace workers? And what we found is that of the 800 companies that we surveyed, more than double the number of companies report that they've actually had to hire additional workers owing to the introduction of new technologies than those that report that they have had to reduce their number of staff. Most companies also expect that this trend will continue in the next 5 years. Rather than job loss, what we have seen is that new kinds of jobs are emerging. 20% of the companies that we surveyed have said that they've had to create new jobs after introducing new kinds of digital systems and digital tools. So the opportunity for India is to find ways of leveraging these new tools and these new digitization and technological tools in order to create enough new jobs for the 15 million people who are entering the workforce each year. We also found some very interesting insights into the forms of work. The second opportunity for India is that today, 92% of employment is informal. The majority of companies are micro in size. And as a result, the vast majority of workers have no access to protections or social security or benefits. So, a central question of our investigation is, how are technology and digitization changing the dynamics of work and the forms and formats in which people work, and shaping their access to social security and protections? So, for companies, flexibility and having a nimble workforce will likely be a prerequisite for successfully navigating technological change. Our research reveals that companies are increasingly hiring non-standard employees. 19% have hired freelance workers, 25% are hiring contract workers, so individuals hired through a third party. Most companies report doing this because of an uncertain business environment and unpredictable workloads. The challenge for India will be to enable new business models to emerge, while at the same time ensuring the welfare and well-being of India's workers. Our research reveals that at the same time, India's youth are receptive to the idea of non-standard forms of employment. So while 50% of youth report that they would like a government job, when we asked them if they're interested in working in the gig economy, 60% reported that they are. This indicates that youth are open to new forms and formats of employment, but that they expect the same kinds of rights, protections, and entitlements availed to public sector workers. To harness the opportunities presented by emerging forms and formats of work, such as the gig economy and freelancing work, protections and benefits will need to be rethought. They will need to be expanded to the vast majority of individuals not currently covered by them. They will need to be adapted for an informal, independent, and increasingly digital workforce. and they will need to be linked to individuals rather than to employers. In the wake of technological disruption, in which workplaces and workforces are shifting from the factory to the cloud, in which the roles of workers, employees, and employers are becoming blurred, it will be possible and necessary to redefine the social norms around work. This is the third opportunity for India. Among companies that we surveyed, 30% hire no female workers. 70% hire fewer than 10% female employees. When companies were asked if they're looking to bring on more workers, more female workers, 37% reported no because they prefer to hire men. The economic and social case for bringing more women into the paid economy is clear. Nearly all of the female youth that we surveyed are looking for jobs, and they're looking for full-time careers. Yet, they report facing personal biases that constrain their ability to find desirable jobs. The moment of disruption and change in which workplaces and employment relations are shifting is an opportunity to renegotiate the terms of economic participation, to instate a new normative framework that enables greater participation of women and other marginalized communities in the paid economy. The future of technology is not set in stone. The public and private sectors and civil society and individuals alike have the responsibility and the scope to shape that future. The opportunity for creating a more inclusive future of work in India is immense. Today I've outlined 3 opportunities. One is to create sufficient employment opportunities for the growing workforce. The second is to recalibrate social security and social protection mechanisms to better meet the needs of industry and individuals. And the third is to bring more women and to rewrite the rules that govern economic participation and bring more women into the workforce. Now is the opportunity to define a desirable future of work and to set out a path for doing that. Thank you.
I can't really keep up with fantastic statistics, but what I can do today is really give you some practical insights from all of my experience of working across different ecosystems in India and backing companies across early stages in a whole bunch of different industries in India as well. I think I'd just like to take a minute to talk about how I perceive the future of work. I think that given where we are globally, there are really 2 extremes. One is sort of what you've been reading about and hearing about a little bit during this conference, and the other is the complete extreme that we all know about well. The first being sort of blockchain, right? So distributed authority. How do we build an organization, or how do we build the future of an organization or a workplace to be built on a block which is distributed, and there's a bunch of different employees who are seen as different chains on this particular block. There's trust, there's consensus, and everybody agrees and works together in harmony. The other extreme is the Catholic Church, which has been operating the same way since 4 BC, and they take similar measures and are slow in adopting new mechanisms from the outside world. Both mechanisms work, but in reality, I think what we see mostly is a healthy middle ground between the 2 right now. This healthy middle ground was really captured around the 1980s at its peak, and the way that it was captured was by installing middle managers to handle processes in organizations. These processes today are now managed predominantly by software, and let me give you an example. So, earlier on, if you had to get a paycheck approved, for a travel expenditure, you would go to your immediate manager above that. He would collate all the reports for people you've been working with, take them to his manager above that, and then the manager above that. Today, you can simply input all of these into a piece of software, which is perhaps looked at by one person and is approved with a click of a button. These stats are really reiterated by the fact that 90% of the workforce in 1980 was living a paycheck lifestyle. Sorry, I put together a small presentation here just to reiterate a couple of these points. Like I said, in 1980, 90% of the workforce lived a paycheck lifestyle, while today in 2018, 30 or 40% of the working population actually work in a more ad hoc manner. And what that's really done is it sort of built rise to what I like to call the free agents of technology and the free agents of industry. Now, these don't necessarily define the core workforce as we know them, but they're actually just a handful of individuals that work between a whole bunch of different organizations and are able to add inherent value to them given their specific and particular skill set. Now, in today's day and age, I think it's difficult to really pin down and say that an organization is purely a result of a large workforce that it's built. A primary example of that is something like Hilton Hotels, which has a market cap of $23 billion and 163,000 employees, versus something like an Airbnb, which has a $30 billion market cap and only 3,000 employees. So what's happening is that there is a small amount of people at the core of an organization who are predominantly technologists who are actually able to maneuver the way these societies and industries work and how these technology companies are built. I think that this is a fair example given the global audience that we have, but this is really how the first world has developed with its services and its infrastructure, because they have the services and infrastructure to be able to support organizations like this. India, however, is a completely different story, and that's what I'd really like to talk about now. India is a poor country. I think we often forget, sitting in a fancy hotel here, that India's GDP is $1,700 per person, which is 1/6 of China's, 1/40th of the US's, and culturally, India is incredibly different from anybody else that we can try and compare it to. India has this do-it-for-me culture. The whole thinking behind a self-serve model is not really existent in India. Whether you are part of the 80 million people with a household income of above 10 lakhs, or you're part of the large emerging middle class of 500 million people with a household income of between 2 and 10 lakhs, everybody wants a product and service offered to them in a certain way, and that's how India has conventionally worked. Now, India is conventionally a country of middlemen, merchants, micro-entrepreneurs, traders, and everybody is looking to make a quick buck in the transactional life cycle of a system. Now, this could happen within a larger organization, but mostly we've seen it in an unorganized economy. So how can we really find ways, now because of India's lack of infrastructure really, how can we find ways to create ancillary infrastructure to make these transactions much more seamless and smooth? And our answer to that is really, globally, large technology companies have tried to cut out middlemen from transactions. In India, we have to do quite the opposite. How do we actually find ways of enabling these middlemen back into transactions to make it more seamless for them and for them to make the transactions work in a much more smooth manner? So, India has 51 million SMEs and 12 million Kirana stores, mom and pop stores. And it's fair to say that the answer to creating more entrepreneurs in India is really what Jio have done. Jio, in 18 months, will bring 500 million people online for the first time. Every quarter, 20 million new people are coming online, and smartphone prices have obviously fallen beyond $40 a handset. They're closer to 33, 34. This is obviously predicted to fall even more. Data consumption has obviously exploded, and obviously data tariffs have fallen close to 50% in India. I think the closest assessment of how important this is looking at GNI versus GNI per capita of countries. India had a GNI per capita of 2.6% in 2015, which has now fallen to between 0.5 and 0.9%. To draw some parallels, 0.4 is the UK and 0.3 is the US. So data consumption is growing rapidly, and smartphone sales have doubled, and the prices of smartphones have come down. So there's really two large opportunities that we see to make businesses productive here. One, build a business that leans into content consumption in this particular mold. The next 500 million people, how will they consume, how will they learn, how will they transact? Or the second one is use the supercomputer tool in your pocket to engage these people and increase ways of their livelihood. The latter is what I'd like to focus upon a little bit more, and this is really where we see the future of, yep, that's the one. And this is really where we want to see the future of where India works. Terri, you highlighted this a little bit earlier, but 80% of all people online in India are actually men. And that itself, how can we sort of bridge that barrier in being able to bring more women online and make them transact online and make them micro-entrepreneurs online? India accounts for half the digital gender gap worldwide, and even though it accounts only for 12% of the total internet population, we see a large sort of opportunity here. So we've been fortunate to work with a whole bunch of different technology companies across the way, and our thesis for India has been simple: enable with technology, but deliver via humans. Everybody wants somebody to be able to talk to, somebody to be able to hold accountable for. How do we build technology like this? And how do we enable these middlemen to be successful entrepreneurs in themselves? I'll give you a practical example. We were fortunate to be early investors in a business called Meesho. Meesho basically uses WhatsApp, which is the most popular messaging platform in India and perhaps globally, to be able to enable middlemen, who are actually housewives, to be able to sell products to eventual customers. Now, there's some interesting stats about Meesho as a business. They started with a focus on fashion products. As you'd know, 90% of fashion in India is unbranded. Kurtas, kurtis, salwar kameezes, etc. These are unbranded, and conventionally they were bought and procured from local kirana stores or local merchants that you know and had engagements and interactions with. But what happened with the sort of uprise of Facebook and Facebook pages was that people would collate inventory from different shops and different merchants, put them up on their Facebook page and say, call it Rohan's Boutique, and say, here are different 50 sari styles. How do I, and if you'd like to purchase them, contact me via WhatsApp. So we saw that eventually every transaction was moving onto WhatsApp. And what Meesho was able to do quite successfully was to actually build a whole supply marketplace and was able to provide a lot of these erstwhile housewives at home who weren't earning anything the ability to plug into this ecosystem and then sell these products via Meesho. Now, Meesho is a 2-year-old company. We clocked $100 million in GMV this year. The most enticing stats for me from that business are that 70% of these resellers, the middlemen, are actually housewives who were previously unemployed. They've added on average 35% to household income, where household income is between 30 and 35,000 rupees. So the kind of impact that they're being able to create, not only in adding household income, but in also being seen as entrepreneurs in themselves and being seen as empowered women, is fantastic. So my thinking is simple. India will never lose this sense of wanting things being spoon-fed to them. How do we find a way to enable people to take advantage of that, make them entrepreneurs, and make them free of any social and societal norms? Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. I'm going to take a small sliver of a large amount of research that we did on what we call open source leadership. And I'm going to suggest that rather than increasing control, if you want to maximize organizational productivity, you're going to have to set your employees free. That's going to be the argument I'm going to make in the next 9.5 minutes. So allow me to do that. Let me start with a bit of jeopardy. The answer is 13%. What's the question? And the question is, what percentage of the global workforce in traditional companies that employ full-time employees, not the gig economy, are highly engaged and energized by their jobs and their work? 13%. This is according to Gallup. That means a whopping 87% of people coming to work in the traditional economy and full-time jobs are disengaged or not fully engaged in their jobs and not excited by them. The answer is 40%. And you should know the answer. What's the question? You should know this from Rohan's presentation from a minute ago. It's roughly the percentage of people, at least in the United States, that are free agents. In Malaysia, where I come from, 33% of the Malaysian workforce are now free agents, participants in the gig economy, which surprised me because this, and told me that this is not just a Silicon Valley phenomena, it is coming to Asia as well. The thing about these free agents is that they are free. They have a lot of freedom. And I'm going to put an argument to you is that traditional companies need to give the same amount of freedom to these people if they want to maximize productivity. The reason why only 13% of the people are engaged in the workplace lies, in my humble opinion, on two assumptions about management practice that I believe no longer hold true in the gig economy. And here they are. The first is all employees in the organization must be given stretch goals. Everybody must be encouraged to go above and beyond, and then it is the job of managers, immediate managers, to closely monitor them and motivate them so that these stretch goals are achieved. That's the first flawed assumption. And the second one is, if left to their own devices, employees or people will do as little work as possible. Again, I'd like to show you that that's a problem, and that is not true anymore. Why is that not true? Let's look at them one by one. But I'd like to point your attention to something that we've known since 1906, and that is the 80-20 rule. In 1906, Wilfredo Pareto told us that 80% of all effects on anything are because of 20% of the causes. And that's been true and hasn't been debunked in 100 years in any walk of life, whether it's software, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's sales, whether it's customer service. 80% of the effects come from 20% of the sources. And what it means in the workforce, if you have traditional full-time employees, is this, that 20% of any work group are going to be high-performing, 60% are going to be average performing, and 20% are going to be bottom performing. That is not, so this is the derivative of the 80-20 rule, and this is the reason why those two assumptions that I showed you earlier, which is all employees must be given stretch goals, is untrue, because this very clearly says that only 20% of the people are actually going to achieve them. But year after year, managers around the world follow that rule, which is that everybody must be given stretch goals, and only to disappoint themselves 80% of the times at the end of the year. You know, not only do we ignore the genius of Pareto, we also ignore the genius of Einstein, who told us that trying to do the same thing again and again every time and hoping for a different result is a definition of insanity. But try teaching that to the management world, and no, they will not buy into this. Now imagine a conversation like this. The remaining 60% of the bottom 20% are not bad people. They are needed in order to create the magic that the top 20% do overall. But imagine a conversation between manager and employee, which goes like this. Hey, boss, you know what? Thanks very much for all the bonuses and the promotions you've given me in the last 5 years. You know I've worked really, really hard. I've been in the top 20%, and you've rewarded me fairly with huge bonuses. You've given me promotions. Thanks very much. But now, as you know, I just became a parent, and I'd like to move to the middle 60 for a little bit so that I can focus a bit. And by the way, I'm okay if you pay me average rather than exceptional bonuses and not promote me as frequently as you did in the last 5 years. I'm okay with that, boss. Can we agree on this contract? Now tell me, is this an honest conversation? Is it an honest conversation? It's not an honest conversation? It is an honest conversation. Of course it is. I am saying, I worked really hard in the last 5 years, I just became a parent, and now I'd like to take my foot off the pedal a little bit. I'm okay with average pay until I come back up on top. Of course, it's an honest conversation. But does it ever happen? No, it never happens. Now imagine further, somebody who is here, okay? Boss, I want to be honest with you. I like this company, but this job is not my be-all and end-all. My passion is theater. But you know, theater doesn't pay the bills all the time. I need this job to pay the bills, okay? Can we agree, boss, that you will give me minimum possible work so that I can retain my job in return for minimum possible pay? And I will also be willingly take the risk that if you think that I've gone below the minimum, you'll fire me with no questions asked. Another honest conversation that never takes place. My point is this. Whether you like it or not, your performance distribution is going to distribute in this bell-shaped curve. Why not legitimize it and give people the freedom to choose where they want to be on this bell curve and pay them accordingly, reward them accordingly? Whether you give everybody stretch goals, whether you give everybody no goals, whether you control them till the cows come home, whether you don't control them, performance is going to distribute like this. If you legitimize it, And by the way, organizational performance will not go down. Why? Because the top 20% are going to produce 80% of the results anyway. And now the remaining 60 and 20, because you've taken the stigma away from so-called non-performance and replaced it with honest contracts of employment, they will also work with less stress and more happiness. So overall productivity of the organization should go up rather than down, isn't it? But no, we want to control. But no, we want to give everybody stretch goals, and nobody wants to acknowledge something that has not been debunked mathematically for over 100 years. This is not me talking. This is Wilfredo Pareto talking and the 80-20 rule talking, right? So, as I said, what if we gave people the freedom? And I'm telling you it will work, and let me close with one last example from the gig economy where it's a glaring example of how it works. And it is this. You look at Uber. Now, what turns out is that 62% of Uber employees are either fully or partly employed with Uber, and 38% are partly driving Uber, and 38% are fully driving Uber. But 78% of all Uber drivers are highly excited and satisfied with their job, and 73% said, we prefer a job without a boss. So global norm of 13% engaged. Here in the gig economy, it is 78%, right? Now compare this with a traditional old economy company, the New York Taxi Company. New York Taxi Company has a system whereby they want to control the drivers. And how they control the drivers is they give them a universal daily target. Okay? You got to make this much revenue. The problem is that if you exceed that target, there is no incentive to you as a driver. You cannot carry forward that balance to the next day. You can't get paid anymore. So who has raised your hand if you've tried to get a yellow cab in New York City on a rainy day? Has anybody tried? How hard is that? Incredibly hard, isn't it? You know what happens? Because on a rainy day, the demand for taxis is so high that these guys meet their daily revenue target by 12 o'clock and they knock off work and go home because there's no incentive. So here we are, a company that completely gives up control and gives their people total freedom when to work, how much to work. Employees are happy. So not employees, their free agents are happy. The company does well, whereas a company that is controlling, everybody's unhappy, and the company is not doing well at all. So my argument to you is this, my dear friends, to maximize performance in the open source gig economy, even if you employ full-time employees, let them choose where they want to be on the 20-60-20 curve. To maximize performance, set them free. Thank you very much. Was that 10